Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us again for another of these interviews. If you've been following for a while, you'll know that we've done a whole series now with different people sharing their stories of following God's lead into a cross-cultural ministry. And today I've got another really wonderful friend who is willing to share her story with us. But you'll notice that there are some very real challenges in what she has to share. And I've asked her, as much as she feels able, to talk about the unvarnished truth and the difficulties that she went through. Because the fact is, we have to be really real about what the cross-cultural journey is like. It's the front line of spiritual warfare, and things do happen that are shocking and difficult. So we need to be real about these things. And I've asked Bev if she would be very kind and just share her story as it was, as much as she feels able. So anyway, let me introduce you now to Bev Gigney. Bev, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for being
welcome.
being part of this sharing. So Bev was in China with us for a number of years, and she started a work called Dove's Wings, which was a little home for abandoned children or kids who were too sick to survive in an orphanage, and she was allowed to take them out and take care of them in her home. And this became a really significant work, we believe, and I wanted to share about that as well. So anyway, let's get started. Thank you again for joining us. And Bev, we've been known each other for a long time, but we were both getting on a bit when you first arrived in China. So I'm aware there's a lot about your story that I'm not even aware of what happened before you went to China. So would you mind starting there and sharing with us your background and where you were born and raised, your family, and all the other things that are relevant there?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was born in a little town, gold mining town called Kalgoorlie, which is sort of
in Western Australia.
In Western Australia, yes, it is. Yeah, I had one brother, and my granddad used to live with us as well. And my father was killed when I was about 5. He was killed on the mine. And then so Mum sort of battled along with Pop's help for quite a few years, and then she remarried. And we had a wonderful stepfather who was good to us. But none of us at the time were Christians or anything, although somewhere along the line I must have heard about God, because I used to listen faithfully every Sunday night to our old valve radio, to Herbert W. Smith, I think was his name. And and I would just listen to him every night. And I was only probably about 8 or 9 at that time when I started listening to him. But I never went to church or anything, and I never talked about it to anyone. So it must have been God had me in his hand at that time, from that time onwards. So I just grew up, went through high school, worked mainly on sheep stations, governessing children, School of the Air radios. It's when we had lessons on the School of the Air, and then I taught them for the rest of the day in their classroom. So I did that most of my life. And then I did a stint in Laverton, which is right in the middle of nowhere of Western Australia in the outback, and discovered my love of nursing. Uh-huh. And I decided there and then that's what I was going to do. I was going to become a nurse. But I'd promised myself to another job, and when I'd finished that, I got married, and then I had 4 children. And once the children all went to school, that's when I started doing my nursing training. I was determined to do it.
Wow.
It was wonderful. And so my mother and I had this arrangement: when I was at the nursing school learning, she would be at home with my kids, and we went 50-50 in my pay. So that helped them as pensioners, and it helped me to gain my nursing skills.
Wow.
So it worked very well, yeah. So, and even at that time, I wasn't going to church, but I still had this, you know how you have a God consciousness all the time. And my kids went to Sunday school, and actually they begged me to go one day for Mother's Day ceremony where they were going to sing. And I thought, I don't really want to go to there. And So, but I went for their sake, and they come out and they did that. And all these weird people were there standing up with their hands in the air and clapping and singing and being happy. And I thought, oh, this is a cult of some sort. But it was a Pentecostal church. And eventually I sadly got divorced. And then I was really, really searching for something. And I was advised to go to a Keswick convention when I'd moved into Esperance, and I went along to a very, very dry service. The speaker was terribly boring and dry, but somewhere in the middle of all of that, I knew suddenly that I was born again.
Wow.
And it was purely with God. It was purely, I was right in the middle of this very dry meeting, and I can remember thinking, God, this is not what I want. And he obviously thought, oh, yes, it is. And just like that, I knew that I was born again. He just built my faith in extraordinary ways. I started going to a Pentecostal church, but it was like I felt like I was on a one-on-one journey with God, and he just built my faith in the most amazing ways. So that's where my journey started, a long time ago with God, but in all seriousness, when I moved after my divorce.
Right. So then you were still working as a nurse at that stage then?
I was working in a doctor's surgery as the nurse in the surgery. I had done a long stint in Kalgoorlie Hospital, but yeah, I was a nurse at a doctor's surgery here in Esperance, and I was there for quite some time. Okay.
But we met in China. So how did you sense a call for you to go to or God's leading anyway, for you to go to China? When did that happen?
Oh, James Goss. After my children all finished school and found jobs, I had always had an orphanages on my heart, always, but I didn't know how to get there and how to connect with it. And James Goss came down to Esperance, and he gave a talk on Chinese churches support ministry, and he talked about the mercy side of it, with the teams going to the orphanages. So I spoke to him afterwards, and I said, well, look, I've always had orphanages on my heart, but nobody knows how to get there or help. And he said, oh, that's easy. We've got a mercy team going over to an orphanage on this date. It'll cost you this much. It's going to take this long. We were in country this long. He said, do you want to go? And I thought, oh, I'm not really sure. But anyhow, I did. I committed, and I went, and God just broke my spirit, broke my heart on that first visit. Absolutely broke my heart. And I can remember I came home, and first time back at church, I stood at the door of the church and looked at everyone with all the families with their children and babies, and I just started crying for the children that I'd left behind in China. And I just knew then. And I went back on another mercy team the next year, and that's when God spoke to me and said, just let me know that I could not help the children just 10 days a year. That's not helping them at all. In fact, it's possibly making it harder for them, because they have 10 days of people loving on them and giving them things and helping them, and then all of a sudden it's all gone again.
Yeah.
So that's when I decided God was calling me. And I can remember I spoke with David Ryan, who was the mercy leader, and I said to him, I think God is calling me to be here permanently. And he said, well, look, Bev, when you've got your bags packed and your ticket booked, let me know, because everybody says that to me who comes on a mercy team. And so that's just what I did. I went home, I organised everything, rented out my house, packed my bags, booked a ticket to China, and I rang David up and said, well, I've got a ticket booked, I've got my bags packed, and I'm ready to go. Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do? And he said, well, no, look, yeah, I'm not sure. When are you going? And I said, well, I booked my ticket for this date. And there was a pause at the other end of the phone, and he said, did you know we've got a mercy team going in on that same date?
Wow.
And I said, no, but yeah. So I went over with the team to Jiaozhou, And when they left, I stayed.
Right.
And I was sort of seconded to COAT, which is a Chinese orphans assistance team. They had a foster home up and running. So that was wonderful training for me. It was already up and running. So I stayed on with COAT and worked with them for, I think, about 4 or 5 months. February, yeah, 4 or 5 months.
Which year was this by now?
This would have been in the year 2005.
Okay. The process would have been, you needed to do the School of Missions, first of all. So at what stage did you come across and join that?
2004 was my first team over there. And I went straight on a Mercy team. We all met in Hong Kong at, what was it, that high place that was?
High Rock.
High
Yeah.
Rocks. And it really was High Rocks, wasn't it? Yes. All the teams met up there with CCSM. And then we all went in our different directions. And I only ever went on Mercy teams, 2 Mercy teams, and then I went back and stayed. Yeah, so... Yeah.
Okay, so then after how many months in Jiaozuo, you then moved to Xi'an, did you?
I think I must have been there about 5 months, helping to run 5 or 6 months, helping to run their foster home, which was on the top floor of one of the orphanage's buildings.
Okay.
So that was really good training. And after that, David said, "Would I consider going to Xi'an to go to the CCSM," which I did. And and went to a language school. I realized if I'm going to stay there, I needed to learn the language and the culture in order to be able to stay there and work there.
Right. So that would have been a challenge then to go, because it was communal living, wasn't it, in an apartment, and you all had the teaching for the morning for the School of Missions, and then had to go to language school in the afternoon.
That's so right, and it was a challenge, because it wasn't just I wasn't an academic person. I was a hands-on field person, but there was so much, writing and essays and things that we had to do that I thought, I'm going to fail here, because this is just not what I'm here for. It's but it was necessary. In hindsight, it was very necessary to have that training, because we did learn about what it's like to live in another country, and we did learn about having to have tolerance. I'd lived on my own for quite some time, so living with 2 or 3 other people, I had to learn to be much more tolerant than I was, and to fit in with other people, right, which is not something you do when you're living on your own.
Yeah. And how about getting accustomed to the Chinese culture as well? Did that helpful? Was the school helpful for that?
Very helpful. You couldn't possibly stay over there and work for any length of time, I think, in any country, unless you learn their culture, because you're in their home. Yeah. And so you live to commit to be in their home for some time. You commit to learning their culture and living by their culture, their laws. It is their country, and I expected that I would have to learn that. It would be very disrespectful to the Chinese people if I hadn't done that. So, yeah,
I remember we had a team going through, and I was on that team, and I remember I think I was making a visit to the school. That's right, and there was a Sunday meeting where the name Dove's Wings came up. So can you tell us how you started that?
Yeah. Well, I had this dream that I wanted to start a foster home and get the little babies out of the orphanage. Having been with COAT in their foster home, I had this vision of it. And the vision I got that morning was of a dove sitting down with all her little babies tucked under her wings. Right. And I thought, that's just what I want to do. I want to get these babies, and I want to tuck them under our wings and love on them and care for them and nurse them back to health. And I just saw this dove with all these little babies under her wings, and I thought, that's it. And in fact, it is referred to in psalm somewhere where I will hide you under the wings of a dove or something to that effect. And so that's where my dove's wings name came from.
Right. And so how did you go about putting that together then?
I don't know.
How did the Lord lead then and provide?
I was walking home from the language school one afternoon, and I was praying. I prayed you need to pray all the time over there. And I was praying as I was walking, and I can remember saying to God, I might as well go home. I'm not making any difference whatsoever to anyone here, God. I might as well be home. I'm not helping any children. Nothing's happening. So what's the point? And within 6 weeks of me saying that to God, we'd had our first apartment. We had hired 2 office boys and an IE who is a Chinese auntie or carer, all Christians, and we had, I think, our first baby.
Wow.
I know the apartment was the one that we were in as students, came up for rent. So we just went ahead. I spoke with David and he said, well, let's do it. So he went ahead and rented that. I don't know how we found the boys, but the boys came into our lives, Joseph and John, and were eager to be involved. And we found a Chinese lady, Christian Chinese lady, who was already working in the orphanage, who wanted to leave the orphanage but go somewhere and look after children. We employed her and we got a baby.
Wow.
And that all happened within 6 weeks of me saying to God, something's got to happen or I'll go home.
Right.
So I wasn't giving God an ultimatum at all. Sometimes I do, and that's not always a good idea. But yeah, so from then we just moved on. We got 3, I think we had Jonathan there for about 3 weeks, and then suddenly we got 3 more babies from Xi'an orphanage, very little sick ones. So we employed more Christian ladies. Our Ying Chun, our first one that we employed, she brought some friends along, and so we employed them, and yeah, it just snowballed from there. And I kept saying, God, do you know what you're doing? But yes, he did.
Right. And some of those babies then got adopted out of China, didn't they? Or were they also locally adopted?
No, none of them were locally adopted. The Chinese, that's a part of their culture is having perfect children. And because they're orphans, the Chinese thought was if their parents don't love them, then they're not worth having, which is very, very sad. So most of them got adopted to America. Some went to Italy. I'm still actually in touch with some of the families, with some of their children. Yeah, which is really lovely. So I think one girl, one of our baby girls was adopted to Beijing by a lady who came from the adoption center to check and make sure that our kids were worthy of being adopted. And she adopted Joy, one of our baby girls. Yeah,
So, I mean, have you ever thought of the impact that you actually had, not only on the babies, but also on the staff, on other people that you modeled things to?
I had not so much the people, but the babies. I came across this word one day called peripety. The word was peripety. And when you have a peripety moment in your life, it's when your life completely changes in a moment.
Wow.
And I suddenly thought, all of these children that we were able to take to our foster home, that was their peripety moment where their life changed completely. Right. And in fact, I don't know what the odds are for this, but one of the little girls that we had was adopted to Italy, and she has met the Pope.
Okay.
What is the likelihood of an abandoned baby from the middle of China meeting the Pope?
Right.
So that's, it's such a huge impact on their lives. And the ones that I'm in touch with now, they're all doing extremely well. And their parents actually said how well they settled down at home. And I believe that's because they had the one-on-one family type of life that we were able to give them in Dove's Wings.
Right.
There's 4 homes now of Dove's Wings. And I must admit, I'm not at all prideful, but I'm so very proud of the fact that those places are still running in China.
Right. Absolutely. And
Yeah,
it's all locally run now, so that's brilliant.
It's all
too.
locally run. They really, once they got set up and running, they didn't need us there anymore. They're quite capable of doing it all themselves. Probably a lot of things different to what I would have done, but that's okay because they're in their own country and they're in their own culture.
So let's go on to, for you personally then, your time in China. What would you say were the highlights, and what would you say were the biggest challenges that you faced during your years there?
My highlights were, I just adored the babies. They were a highlight for me. I just loved the babies. And I loved doing what I was doing. I felt like I was making a difference. I felt like God was using me. And that for me was such a highlight. And you grow so much closer to God in that situation because he's all you've got to lean on. You haven't got people telling you what to do. You're sort of making the decisions, and you know, he's the only one you've got to lean on. So they were the 2 biggest highlights for me, was the babies and drawing so much closer to God. My relationship with God grew incredibly.
Wow.
The hardest parts, it was never really hard, but I must admit there were quite a few days when I would go home at night into my apartment and shut the door on China and just be Australian and cook Australian food and Western food, and just being able to do that. That was very necessary. I don't think I would have managed had I not been able to do that. And I had some beautiful friends, some wonderful expats that were there. We were a little community, so it was wonderful. But even with that community, you still need to sort of get away and shut the door on the world, and even just sit with God in quietness, you know. Yeah. So
right. So you were talking earlier also about the challenge of your little nest egg that you had set aside.
Yeah. That was pretty devastating, but obviously it was something God knew I didn't need. Before I went to China, I had quite a bit of savings away, and I thought, well, that's what I can live on, because I didn't go with any supporters at all. My church didn't send me. I went on my own, but I put away a certain amount of my money and invested it. And no sooner got to China, very quickly after I got to Xi'an, actually, the market crashed. And I lost my whole little nest egg. And it was devastating because I thought, what am I going to do now? I've got nothing to go home to, absolutely nothing. And it did devastate me for a bit there. I was in tears. I thought, all these plans that I'd made, and now it's come to nothing, and I'm going to go home and have nothing. But God had it. He had it all in hand. At that time, my walk with him was not, it was still strong, but when you sort of think you've got to do all these on your own, and you don't do it with God in mind. I had set that up all on my own, thinking I need to do this, but obviously God knew I didn't need to do this. So yeah. So
nevertheless, I mean, we always encourage people to go to the field with a support team, especially, but also, I mean, normally would have a sending church, but a support team. And I think you did have a group who really prayed for you. Is that right? And one person in particular.
I had a lovely group of ladies who prayed for me all the time, and I always knew that they did. And one of them was a lady called Bubbles. We called her because she was a bubbly person, and she prayed daily for me, and I always knew when she was praying. But then that feeling went one day, and I tried to contact her for over a week, and I couldn't get in touch with her. And then one of my other prayer partners emailed me and said, oh, we're having Bubbles' funeral tomorrow. And I thought, what? Did that Bubbles die? and they hadn't thought to let me know.
Yeah.
And that was another devastation to me, that not just that she died, but then nobody thought to let me know.
Right.
You know, communication from home is so important. It's
Right.
if you haven't got that from home, then you feel so much more alone, so much isolated.
Right.
And
So
I
how did that
actually,
make you? How did that make you feel? That the people hadn't
it
let you
made me
know?
feel forgotten. It made me feel forgotten.
Right.
And I actually did talk to my church about that when I came home from my next holiday, because they always asked me to talk about what I was doing in that. And I brought that up, you know, and I said, the work I'm doing. I said, but I want to talk to you about how I feel when you forget me. And I said, I sometimes feel when I leave Esperance, I'm forgotten. And, when I heard about Bubbles' funeral, before I even knew she died, I said, I was just devastated, and communication was so important.
Right.
And I had a meeting with the elders of the church and as well. And yeah, so I was able to share that with them. But I know that was the feeling I used to get, that as soon as I left Esperance, I had been forgotten. So, yeah. So after that, it was a lot better.
Okay. So Bev was just starting to say, and I've asked her to repeat it, about being called in by the police in the PSB, the Public Security Bureau in China. So why don't you share that, Bev, again?
Yeah, we had been in the mountain areas, giving coats out to the children, winter coats out. And I had been taking photos of the beautiful scenery because it was all snowy and was really pretty. And then about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we went to leave someone's home, and the PSB met us at the door, the police security. And they marched us off to the police station into town. We had to follow them into the police station, and I had a translator with me, and they separated me from them, which was really scary. Fortunately, they didn't go through our van because it had Bibles and Bible tracts and all sorts of things in it. But they brought another translator for me. And I said to her, so you speak English, do you? And she said, yes, yes. I said, did you learn in university? Did you learn English? She said, yes, yes. And I said, oh, how many years did it take you to learn? She said, yes, yes. And I suddenly realized she couldn't even speak English. And we were there for about 6 hours. And they went through my camera and everything, because apparently there had been an army base in the mountains somewhere. We didn't see it. But fortunately, fortunately we didn't see it. So I had no photos of it, just scenery. And we had to get in our van, and we had to leave the whole province within 2 hours of getting out of the PSB.
So they had been following you then? Is that how?
Yeah, they'd been following us around all day, apparently, and we didn't know about it.
But all you were doing was just handing out coats to
giving
families.
out new winter coats to the children. We supplied them to a lot of the school children that we were supporting, that China Heart was supporting at the time. And so we bought them all these coats for winter. And we didn't realize we were being followed around, and they were very sneaky about it. And so it was pretty scary. I don't know what they did with the Chinese people that were with me. I don't know what happened to them, but I hated being separated from them, because I thought, now what am I going to do? So right. But
anyway,
so it was fun in that, but it could have been a serious situation if they'd gone through our van. Then I probably would have been sent home to Australia, and the Chinese people with me probably would have been put in jail. So it could have been very serious.
Great. So tell me, or tell us, what why in the end did you leave China? What actually happened when you actually came to leave?
I had been home on leave, and sadly my son committed suicide. And I just went into shock, I think. And you sort of move in like an automated way. Suddenly things that you never thought you'd have to handle. You have to handle. I don't think any parent should bury a child ever. It's just terrible. But then I went back to China within 6 weeks, and I was still in shock. I should never have gone back. I was still in shock, and I just I felt destroyed. I never ever questioned God, and I'm so happy. I never ever questioned God about it. But I was just in shock and devastated and just not handling anything very well at all. And I know I talked to David about it, and he said he sent 2 ladies over from Sydney to do some prayer work with me. But I can remember saying to him at the time, but what if they come all the way over here, David, and do this Elijah prayer with me, and then I still need to leave, because I knew I needed to come home. And he said, well, then you leave. So they came over and did some Elijah prayer ministry with me, but I felt useless. I couldn't cope with anything. I was grieving. My son was dead.
Yeah.
And I was grieving, and nothing else mattered at the moment. At that particular time, nothing else mattered.
So
my son was gone.
What do you know what it was that drove him to that? I mean, were you aware of what was going on?
Yeah, he was in a bad place. And he'd been involved in drugs and alcohol, but then he got married and had a family, and he came good, and but he would go back. I mean, he had given his life to the Lord, but he would backslide so many times back into the life of drugs and alcohol. And I can honestly remember saying to a friend one day, long before this happened, I might get a phone call one day to say that Ken's dead. That's what it was like. But when it actually happened, nothing prepares you for that. Nothing. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they've done, where they've been. It doesn't matter anything. They're still your son. Still your son. And he was dead. He was gone. And I just, that's all I could think about at the time.
What impact did it have on the rest of the family?
Well, he was estranged from the rest of the family. They would have nothing to do with him. And that's even something that made it even worse, because it meant I couldn't talk to them about it. And in fact, one member of my family said to me, Mum, I'm coming to Ken's funeral, but I'm only coming for you. I'm not coming for Ken. And so I was just focused on Ken at the time. And I said, well, then don't come. Don't come. If you can't think of your brother, now that he's gone, if you can't forgive him, if you can't think of him with a little bit of love in your heart, then don't bother coming. And so it was pretty messy. And I mean, he'd earned their disrespect. He had been dreadful to them. His actions, his manners, he had earned their disrespect. Even mine, we'd had some terrible arguments and things, and he did some terrible things, but nevertheless, he was my boy. He was my son. And it doesn't matter what they do in the long run. When something like that happens, it doesn't matter what they've done. They're still your son. So, yeah.
So that you went back to Australia in the end? How did that?
I did. I came home in the January, February of 2013. I wasn't being I wasn't being at all useful over there anyway. And I just, even with God, I just couldn't function in that. I felt like I needed to be here. And not with my family. I didn't need to be with my family. I wanted to be here with my church, with my Christian friends here.
Right.
But even that, and I had lessons and been taught about re-entry and reacculturalization, but I had no idea what it was going to be like.
Right.
To me, there'd been lessons that I'd written down faithfully, and I expected, well, this is going to happen, but it's not. It's different to what you think.
Well,
because,
especially with that kind of event having happened.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Well, that added to it. And then on top of that, I'd had all my furniture, everything that I owned in storage, and where it was, all the rain had got into it, and I lost everything, absolutely everything.
My God.
It was all just rotted away, and the furniture fell into pieces, and it was just, so really I came back with nothing but a heart full of grief. And because you've changed so much, when you go into ministry work like that, you change. You have to change when you're involved in something like that. But when I came home, I was changed, but nothing else was here. So I didn't fit.
Yeah.
I just didn't fit here. I didn't belong anymore. I just felt like I didn't belong anymore. And I just didn't know what, and I can remember, I was reading about it the other day in my old diary. I can remember sitting and saying to God one day, I am in a dark, dark place and I don't know how to get out of it. And I had a wonderful pastor who would visit me at home once or twice every week. And but we just sat and talked about God, what I needed to talk about. I needed to talk about my son, my grief, but I didn't know how, and he didn't know how, so I'd say it took me a good 3 years before I started feeling comfortable again. So, it was a pretty horrible time.
Yeah, sure. Did you ever ask yourself, where is God in all of this? Or did you never do that?
Never questioned God. Never ever questioned him in it at all. Leaned on him intently. Because God showed me something, Christine, and this is interesting to share. Before I went to China, I raised up a worship team. And I wasn't a musician and I wasn't a singer, but I felt I had this real fire to raise up a worship team, which I did. And I got flags and banners, and I bought a shofar and just got really into heavy worship. And yet all the pastors, we had 2 pastors, and the elders of my church were totally negative towards it, didn't want a bar of it. But still they rostered us on. But I had to fight, and I kept, it was for about 5 years I had this team going, and I had to fight for it all the time. And every time we did worship, I was criticized for what we did, and we'd bring out the flags and I was criticized, and it was negative all the way. And yet God put this fire in my belly, and I knew it was what he wanted me to do. So I stood up to them and I kept going, and I kept saying, I'm sorry, I know that you don't like it, but this is what God wants me to do. So remembering that, when I came home from China many years later, I can remember asking God about that time and said, God, what was that all about? I knew that you wanted me to do it, but nobody else did. And, Christine, honestly, God actually spoke to me audibly, I reckon. And he said to me, Bev, when you stood up to your pastors in that, I was putting a backbone, a spine in your back. I was building your strength, because if you hadn't been able to stand up to them, then you would never have coped in China.
Wow.
And that's what it was all about. And I thought, we just never know what God is doing. No, who would have thought? I didn't even dream of coming to China at that time. I had the worship team. It was the last thing I thought about. But that's what it was all about. God was preparing me.
Right.
So, and that just opened my eyes so much so we just never know what God is doing. And I don't question him, because I know that whatever it is, he's got a plan. Got everything covered, So, and even with the death of my son, the grief never goes away, but you learn to live with it. And I have been able to help or talk to other women who've lost children, just to comfort them, just to be with them, just to know what they need to do. It's a lot of people don't know what to say in that situation. But you need to be able to talk about the one you've lost.
Right.
And if nobody wants to bring that up or listen to it, you've got no one to talk to. It's like they didn't exist. So yeah,
So
so
what
yeah,
you
God has.
didn't receive, you've been able to give out to others.
Well, this is right. And see, this is what God has used it for. And I don't believe it was God's plan for Ken to take his own life. So that was his choice. He made that choice. God didn't make the choice. But God always works for good.
Yeah.
And he will take things like that and he will work them for good if you're willing to allow him to. So, you know, it has worked for good, even though you still feel the grief, but you live with that.
So how do you feel now, you know, about all the lessons that you learned by living in another culture? Do you feel that there's any space for that to be able to share? Or do you feel that you have to dumb it down?
No, I don't. I think a lot of people, no, they wouldn't like dumb it down. It's a lot of people forget that you've been through that. And that's fine because life goes on. But because you've grown so much through it, it's been the most important part of my whole entire life, I believe, my time in China. It just grew me more than any other time of my life has ever grown me. That time grew me. And I am much more tolerant and patient because of my time in China. So, yeah, it does change you.
Right. And do you find, I mean, are there others who want to work cross-culturally? Are you able to input, mentor, talk to them?
Yes. Yeah, I have been able to do that a couple of times, which was really good. Even my own granddaughter, she's been in Cambodia for, she hasn't 3 years now because she hasn't been able to come home. She's teaching English as another language. And so they finally got a flight home on the 28th of this month. And so I've been able to share with her on Skype about re-entry back into Australia, how hard it's going to be for her.
Yeah.
How her friends have moved on, but she hasn't, because, well, she has, but she's changed person. So I've been able to share with her. We had a team, I went with a team to South Africa. And when we came home from that, I made it my business sort of to sit down with each one of them 3 or 4 times afterwards, just to talk to them about how they felt. And I wasn't the team leader, but the team leader had never done it before. So yeah, it has helped me. Yeah, it has grown me so much.
Good for you to still be taking those experiences and making them valuable to others. That's wonderful. So that brings me to my last question, which was, you've already mentioned your granddaughter in Cambodia. There are a lot of people who have not been able to visit family because of COVID. Some people have been wrenched out of their place of service because of COVID and not been able to return. So what would you say to people who are in that kind of situation? How could you encourage them?
The only way you can really encourage them, I think, is I mean, they are, because of where they are already having to lean on God a lot more and press more into him, but to keeping closer touch than they are now, to keeping closer touch with their families and loved ones, and the ones that have been ripped out, you know, keep in touch with the ministry they were in. That was a very important, I hadn't thought about that, but to be able to keep in touch with the ministry that they were in when they had to leave, that's a wrench out of your life.
Right.
You know, and I think that's one of the things that I sort of felt when I came home from China. I felt like I'd been wrenched, even though I needed to come home, I'd still been wrenched out of the relationships I had with the IEs. I mean, I believe one of them was my heart sister, Ying Chun, and I've never forgotten her or any of them. And so, yeah, they do need to be able to be allowed to keep in touch with those ministries that they were involved in. I think that's a very important thing.
So look, Bev, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your heart, sharing, I mean, the tough stuff,
Yes. Yeah.
It's not a walk in the park when we cross into another.
No, it's not. In fact, honestly, I believe it's harder coming home than it was going.
And many people say that.
Yeah, simply because you've changed so much.
Yes.
And that's the hard part. As strange as it feels and as awful as it sounds, you feel like you've grown closer with God than anybody else has because you had to lean on him. But in fact, of course you haven't. They have their relationship with God too. And it's different. It's just different to what we've had. Yeah.
Right. So one of our burdens in FieldPartner is the sending churches. So I'm coming in with another question now. Sending churches, understanding what it takes to send and support well. So,
yes.
I feel that this whole thing of re-entry is in an area that people are not aware of enough. And so I think your story is really important from the point of view of when people churches receive people back to understand how to support them. You were talking about you would do the debriefing with people because it wasn't happening otherwise. And for people to sit there and just let you debrief, let you talk about the highlights and the very real challenges and let you process all that. Your support team could do it, but really it needs to be orchestrated from the leadership of the church. It needs to be part of their process of receiving people back.
That's right. Well, I think I might have been a bit different because my church didn't send me, and in fact, my pastor didn't even believe in me being over there. And I can remember I made an appointment to talk to him one time when I was home, and I wanted to talk to him about what I was doing in China and why I felt God wanted me there. And all he could talk about was South Africa. And I went home to my friend's place in tears and I said, he doesn't care. He doesn't want to know. He just doesn't want to know. And he was the pastor of the church. But as my dear friend explained, he was such a treasure, Russ Rogan. Everybody has a ministry, and Dean's was towards South Africa. So what I was doing in China didn't interest him in the least. But that hurt. That really hurt me. But fortunately, we had 2 or 3 people in our church who had a heart for China.
Right. Good.
And they were the greatest support for me. And even they were amazed that, because there were so many in this one church who had a real heart for China. In fact, one of them went over several times to China. And yet the leadership didn't have a heart for China at all. They had a heart for South Africa. So you just got to understand that other people have different ministries. So
So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you again to Bev for sharing what she has, and also to encourage you to go and listen to not only Bev's interview, but the other interviews that we have up on FieldPartner. And while you're there, why don't you browse through all the other resources that we have? A lot of those we have already touched on in this interview. And if you like what you see, please share them with other people if you know that they are needing to hear some of this stuff themselves. Like us on Facebook and just be part of our community. We ask that you would do that. Thank you very much for joining us on this call. Bye-bye. God bless.